Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to something which is a little bit new. I've come here to an English heritage site called Hailes Abbey. Now Hailes Abbey was the first place that I went to when I actually started my photography journey, which must have been January, February time. First time I came out with a DSLR, and I'm actually here doing a little bit of an experiment because I brought with me this. Now this, if you don't know what it is, it's a silver Canon camera. It's a 350D. This camera is 14 years old. It's the very first DSLR that I ever had, and I got it at a time when I wasn't actually that into photography. I actually got the camera because I wanted to get more into filmmaking, and I wanted an experience. Now this doesn't shoot film. That was so far outside of the realms of possibility when I bought this camera what it lets you do, or let me do, was actually get an experience at learning how to use the camera. So there's this theory which is going around a lot of blogs, a lot of vlogs at the moment, that the camera that you should use is the camera that you've got now. And I think it's a great idea. I think it's a very fine idea. So what I wanted to do was to use a camera that is so far out of date. This is an 8 megapixel camera. I've got a lens, 28-135 lens on it, and that's the Canon EF lens. It's a pretty good lens. But when I took it out of the box that I had it in, 14 years, like I said, the focusing ring on this was covered in a sort of an oily, dirty, still coming off. It's almost like the thing's deteriorating on me. So if the camera, the best camera to get really is the camera that you've got now, this is going to be a real test of that idea, and I'm kind of interested to see what I can get out of it. So this is the shot of Hailes Abbey that I was most wanting to get again. Now, none of the shots that I'm taking today are going to be particularly useful. It's really just an experiment to see what you could get out of a camera like this one, which is so old now. You know, it's still not a bad camera. I seem to remember getting some pretty good shots out of it when I was using it. So it's going on, and I've got it in TV mode at the moment, which is shutter priority, just in case you don't know, which if you're using a different camera with different terminology, you might not. So I'm going to put it on to 200, which is fairly standard. The ISO, oh God, I can't even see that. The ISO is on 100. Now it's so the first problem with it is that lens is really, that monitor is very, very, very dark, but never mind. The sun is up there, and let's see if I can get a shot with this and what it's like. And I've got the focusing is set on the middle. So, half press to focus, which I'm not used to be fair. And I'm going to reframe the shot. And I've got it. Well, I think I've got it anyway. It looks very yellow on the monitor, and I do seem to remember in older shots that I've seen from this camera, actually it does come out looking a bit yellow, so we'll have to see. Now I can have a look at where the white balance is. Oh my lord, this is so dark. I've got auto white balance on at the moment, which I'm going to leave it on mostly because I can't see a thing on that screen. So I want to make sure that it's at least going to work. It's an interesting history of having a camera, and the other thing I forgot to do is put the stabilizer on. So let's try one more with the stabilizer on and see if that makes a difference. That was really odd. Very strange. It must be the image stabilization, and I wasn't holding this particularly stably, I must admit. But the picture was jumping around in the viewfinder there. Yeah, possibly something to do with that. We never know. Anyway, that's that's the first shot done. The other thing, of course, is that this is a zoom lens, so we want to try something with a zoom on to get interesting shots and things. We'll do that in a little bit, but for now that's the first shot. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but you will in a second when you watch this little clip with a voiceover. All in all, I'm quite pleased with this image, and when I got it into Lightroom, I was actually pleasantly surprised with what I could do with it. Now, I didn't resize it a lot, and that's probably the biggest limitation of having an 8 megapixel image, but I suppose because I was still shooting RAW, I didn't really feel limited with anything else that I wanted to do. Certainly, this is perfectly acceptable if you're only planning to show it online. So I've got a bit of an interesting history with photography because both of my parents are photographers. In fact, the first thing that I remember about photography is not the images that I saw actually, but it was hours and hours going on holidays and going out to places, waiting for my mum as she changed lenses or tried to get the right exposure or any of the myriad things that we all know can happen when you're actually trying to shoot anything. So as a kid, I hated photography. And why wouldn't you? I mean, look, imagine that you're 4 years old, you are standing around waiting for an adult to do something with a camera and you never see the results of it. Well, you know, Mum's results actually were pretty good. Even though I didn't realise it at the time. I remember though that the first time that I saw a photograph and that actually had some sort of impact on me was actually one of Dad's old black and white photos that he'd taken before I was born. It was actually a photo, a close-up, a macro shot of a fly, and it was, as much as it was black and white, it was also very beautiful as well. There was something about it that kind of, that spoke to me. But as a kid, I wasn't interested in this. I wasn't interested in that old technology. What I was interested in was film. And of course, why not? Film was exciting. Film was Back to the Future and Star Wars and all of those amazing things. And I do remember when I was at an impressionable age, there was a group of kids who got together and they had recreated almost shot by shot one of the Indiana Jones films. I can't remember which one right now. In fact, there is a documentary about that on, I think it's on Netflix. It was on Netflix if it isn't already. If it isn't still. It was very interesting. It was incredibly interesting to see what you could do if you were just a kid. But to me, film was, it was so far in the distance. You know, the technology that you'd need to buy to start doing anything in film was impossible for me. And eventually I got, you know, DV cameras and high 8 cameras and progressed on to digital, a big digital. I paid about £3,000 for this digital thing, which I used for years, and started doing things like corporate video and stuff. And I did get in with people and we did start making films. The problem, of course, with that, as with all of these things, is the cost was prohibitive. You know, you'd spend, even if you've got all the equipment, you might spend up to £1,000 actually getting a location. I know we spent a couple of £100 on a hotel room once because we needed a location. And it was just too much. You know, it's not something that you could do on a regular basis with people who have just got normal, ordinary, everyday jobs. And by the time you then need to start paying people to do actual work, it's so expensive. So I stopped really, and other things got in our way as well, you know, business and life and all things like that. But it was still something that I was interested in. But before all of that, before getting so involved in film, I'd actually gone out and bought myself a DSLR camera. And it wasn't an inexpensive one, it was a fairly cheap one. It was this one that I'm shooting on today, the 350D. I get confused because Canon and Nikon, the Ds are at different ends of the name. It's not a bad camera. I got it really because I was interested in learning how to make film, and I thought, well, at least if I have a camera, I can practice all those things that you need to do, like exposure and focusing and all of that sort of stuff. And it didn't really work out like that because I used it for about a year, and that was it. I used it when I went into business as well. I used it when I did website design. Occasionally websites need photos, and this was a great camera for doing that because the files weren't huge. You could still manipulate them, and yet you could shoot in RAW, so you could get kind of the best of both worlds. It's still a good camera for on screen. The photos that I'll be taking today, I will likely be able to post on Instagram without any problems. In fact, I've posted photos from this camera on Instagram before, and it was perfectly fine. It's not like you're looking at a really reduced size. Don't forget that 8 megapixels as a camera isn't too dissimilar from a photo that would be taken on the iPhone 4S. I think iPhone 5 was still 8 meg, maybe it was a bit more. But so you're not talking about a long time ago. In terms of sort of megapixels and stuff, and a camera like that is perfectly good enough. But for me at the time, there wasn't that sort of outlet. There wasn't the Twitters, or at least Twitter wasn't a great place for photographers and things, and Instagram wasn't really there, and YouTube wasn't really a thing, not like it is today anyway. And so my interest in it kind of petered out as I moved into doing film. Plus the costs of doing it, I'd worked with a few models, and I wasn't sure what sort of photography I wanted to be in. Then I'd gone to some events and things. The cost of doing that was still kind of prohibitive, if not in actual monetary terms, but in time as well. And I wasn't good at things like Photoshop. I was okay. I could do the sort of Photoshop that I needed to do to put a website together, and that was about it. So photography was something that kind of went onto the back burner for a long time. Whilst I was doing film, I moved into doing corporate videos. That was kind of fun, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do with it in the long run. And then a few years ago, I went on holiday with my parents because they're getting old now, and they, to have somebody to drive them around is quite a good thing. I get a free holiday out of it, and both of my parents, like I said, were photographers, so they both took cameras. And instead of standing around and waiting whilst they were taking photos, I was taking photos myself, only this time just with my iPhone. And I started off with an iPhone 4 and I went up to an iPhone 7 Plus, and then I've got a XS Max now. And the choice to change cameras was always change phones. I think of it as a camera with a little phone app on, that's why. The choice to change phones was always because of the technology in the cameras, or the new things that phone could do. The dual cameras on the 7 Plus, I think it still has a dual camera on, and on this new one. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of equipment. It's a 12 megapixel camera, so it's perfect for stuff like Instagram. It's got 4K video, so it's perfect for stuff like YouTube. I didn't think at that point that I would go on and buy the camera that I'm shooting on now, which is the Blackmagic, no, it's not. It's the DJI Osmo Pocket. I keep getting those two confused because I like both of them. And the great thing about taking photos with people who are also photographers is that actually you get a little bit of praise for the photos that you're taking, because they understand if you've made a good photo. They understand if they understand things like composition and colors and things like that. So I'd be taking these photos on my iPhone, and Dad would be going, "Oh wow, that's amazing," and I'd think, is it really? Is it good enough? I mean, and for a shot taken on an iPhone, it was. For a holiday snap, it was perfect. But I wanted to do a little bit more to it, and that kind of came to a head at the beginning of the year when we went to the Cotswold Wildlife Park. It's one of those things, you treat somebody for a day out, and we ended up there anyway. And I got some fantastic shots, which the DSLR cameras probably could have got, but couldn't, for various different reasons. I got a brilliant one of a snake, which is still, which is a photo that actually gets quite widely praised when it gets shown. But I couldn't get the ones that I wanted to get. I wanted to get a rhino. and it just wasn't, the quality wasn't good enough to get a Rhino. So I looked into what I could do about that and wound up with some Moment lenses. Now, I don't know if you've seen these things, they are absolutely amazing. I got the wide angle one, which is 18mm, and I got the 58mm telephoto and the case to go on the phone. And the shots that I got with this thing were absolutely stunning. I was so pleased. But still, it was an iPhone and it had its limitations. And not long after that, having seen some of the photos that I've been doing and seen some of the work, because I was starting to use Lightroom at that point, Mum said, why don't I give you one of my old cameras to play around with and see if you like it? And that's when I came here for the very first time to Hailes Abbey with a Nikon D7000, and I didn't know what I was doing. I played around with it as much as I could, but I still wasn't entirely sure what I was doing with it. So that's why I thought today would be an interesting thing, and this would be a good place to go, because this really, I mean, it's come full circle, you know. I've got my first ever camera with the first ever location that I really thought of as I'm coming here to take photos because I want to do something with photography. And I'm very interested to see what I'm going to be able to get out of it. Okay, this is my second shot. So what I've got is, looking across here, you probably can't see it very well, there's an arch, and then behind that there's an arch which is in shade. So same arches that we were talking about before. Now, the reason that I want to try and get that is I want to see how well the dynamic range does with this particular camera. Probably not very well. I'm not expecting miracles out of it, but it might be interesting. It's something that would be interesting to have a look at when you get back into Lightroom. So camera's going on. I'm probably going to shoot at 28 again. Now I'm going to put my here. Right, I'm going on 160. Image stabilization's on. Let me just see if I can frame that up. It's not really working. In fact, I think I'm probably going to have to try and get back a bit further. So let's try that, shall we? Okay, I'm used to an 18mm camera, so there's that, you know, and now there's people there, which is fine. These sort of things happen. What I really like is everywhere to be free of people, no matter what. That's the photographer's dream, right? So let's see if I can frame this up again and do the same thing. Just whilst we're talking here, I'm putting it on 160 here because this is a 28-135 lens. Now, the general rule of thumb, if you want to make sure that you're not getting blurry images, is that you should have a shutter speed that is at least as much as your zoom length. So with 160, even if I zoom into 135, and this is a macro lens as well, so pretty good. Even if I zoom into 135, I should be able to get a sharp image, which if you've watched my videos before, you know has been a problem. We should solve that anyway. Now this is better in terms of framing, but not by much. We're sharp, we're in focus. I've got a picture in the back of the screen. God, it looks yellow. Maybe that's just because the equipment's old, I don't know. But we'll see how that comes out when we go into Lightroom and when you go into this little voiceover thing. And there they go. Now, usually I would have given this a little more room around the edges before I cropped it to a 4x5. But again, I'm used to having an 18mm lens, and that did take its toll a little bit. But look at this image. Look at how this image handled the shadows there. There's a bunch of detail in there, which I suppose you should expect if you're shooting RAW, but I'm actually pretty impressed with the images that I've got out of this camera, and it's definitely sharp. In fact, I didn't have a problem with sharpness over this whole trip. Hailes Abbey is all about arches, and this is no exception. There's an arch back there, and for the next exposure what I wanted to get was the sun coming through that arch. Again, this is going to allow me to play with light and shade in Lightroom to see how well the camera does. Again, I've got to say this, a 14-year-old camera, how well is that going to do on a shot like this? Well, we'll see in just a minute. So again, same settings as before, 160. let's just have a quick exposure on this and see how it works. I can't see that very well, but I've definitely got light and I've definitely got shade. One more perhaps, and I think I'm going to stand close to the camera so I'm further away from the subject. You see, it'll be fun. Okay, looks good. Let's have a quick look at it, shall we? This camera was a bit of a stalwart for me when I was doing web design and things. There are images from that camera that have been printed in brochures for actual real companies that really exist. Because the picture quality that you get out of this isn't bad. I've actually been able to print some of them at A4 and they look fine. You wouldn't know that it was from a digital camera, which for the time was pretty amazing. This actually wasn't even my first digital camera. I had a little Kodak thing that was my very, very first one. And that was back when the idea of a digital camera was the cost of it was so far outside the realms of possibility for anybody that you couldn't really conceive of it. So getting those little cameras to start, they were great, but I didn't do a lot with them. They were for snaps, they were for holidays, they were for, oh, we're going out, let's take some pictures of where we are. Because you couldn't really share them anywhere. I mean, Facebook was kind of around, but it wasn't as ubiquitous as it was now. And the idea of sharing a photo when you were still on speeds for the internet, which weren't great, let's face it. And so that's for upload as well as download. There weren't very many places to share the photos around, and so there wasn't that. And I don't want to say instant feedback, because I think instant feedback is probably the wrong reason to take pictures and share them online. But there wasn't any feedback from it, except for maybe your mum or your aunt or something like that. And it didn't feel like I was doing anything important at that point. It was a practice, it was a play, it was something for me to understand so I could move on to something else. Now it's a lot different. Now, first of all, you get a lot of people on Instagram who will comment on your photos, so you've got some idea whether what you're doing is good enough for your audience. But more importantly, what I'm doing right now is I'm doing things to learn photography. I'm doing it to get myself better at something that I want to get better at. And that's something I haven't had to do for a very long time, and it's incredibly rewarding. Okay, so the last shot that I'm going to do today is just behind me. Now, before I go into that, I have just done a few texture shots just to try out the macro lens as well. That was quite interesting because on this stone, it's a very Cotswoldy sort of stone. There's several areas of it which was crisscrossed with spiders' webs. So again, I thought a really good test for the camera, something which would be interesting to do. Now behind me, which you probably can't see, if I just move this way a little bit, there's the main sort of gate that takes you down there. And I want to get a shot of that. I want that to be a portrait shot just of that hole. And I'm going to stand back here from down, quite a way off, but long enough to be able to get that sort of shot. Again, I'm looking at wide as I can go, which is 28. Turn it on. We're at 7.1, which is just a 1.35 to 5.6 lens, so it's up a bit from where you'd normally be, and we've still got the shutter speed of 160. So let's give that a go and see how it turns out. Of course, it helps. This is something that you only really realise when you've got a hat on, and it's a floppy hat like this, is that sensors are in the front of the camera and they can't always detect what the light's like when you put your hat over it. So I'm going to do this. Here is that final image. I really thought that this worked better in black and white, and it shows you how much these images can be manipulated, because I've done a little bit with shadow and light in here. And for this trip, I have to say how happy I am with these shots. There is plenty of data here to be able to use these for all manner of things, and I'm still surprised really that a camera that's 14 years old is good enough to produce results like this. I guess it's true. I think I've proven the hypothesis. the best camera to use really is the camera that you've got right now, even if it's a camera that's over a decade old. I think you can safely say that actually out of this camera we've got some pretty good photos. They're photos that if you want to make a name for yourself on Instagram, you could easily go and do that. You possibly couldn't sell them as big prints, which in some respects is a problem, but in others, you know, you've got to learn your craft first. And a camera like this, because I did look it up on eBay before I came out, a camera like this with this lens is going for at most £80 on eBay at the time of recording this video. And that was the most expensive one that I found. I mean, there was some for £14, £15, £80, just to give you some idea. Again, at the time of recording this, is around about $100. So all you need to really get started is $100 and the will to go out there and actually take some photos. And believe it or not, the biggest thing, the biggest problem that you're going to get if you want to do anything like this is actually going out there and taking the photos, because that's when I'm going to say when the rot starts to set in, but that's not quite what I mean. That's when the doubt starts to set in. That's when you suddenly start to think, hang on, am I good enough to do this? Because you won't feel that you are, and in some cases you won't be. But if you don't get out there and take those photos in the first place, you'll never be. And what I'd like to see, if there's people who are interested in doing photos, is actually going out there and taking shots and making things work for them. And you don't need to spend a fortune doing it. The cheapest I found this camera for, just by hunting around a little bit, with the same lens, with a CF card, because they use old CF cards included, a 1GB CF card, which is the same sort that I'm using in this camera right now, which gives you about 100 shots, which is not bad. So the cheapest I found this, all in, with the card, with the charger, with the lens, was £14. £14. And yet there are people who are out there saying, oh, well, I can't get started because I haven't got the latest mirrorless Sony camera. Well, you don't need the latest mirrorless Sony camera. You need to get out there and take photos. And when people are saying that the best camera that you can get is the one that you have on you right now, you could very possibly already do that just by using your smartphone or whatever camera that you've got lying around, because there's plenty of people who will be able to donate a camera to you, or somewhere where you might be able to go and get something maybe for even less than that, which is still an 8-megapixel camera. The choice is yours, really. But the real message that I want to give to people is don't just sit around waiting for the right time or the right equipment or the right thing to come along that you know is going to make you a star, because it won't. It won't happen. If you want to make any inroads, whether this is something that you want to do as a hobby or something that you want to do as a living, you've got to get out there and do it yourself. You've got to take the bull by the horns and go out there and actually start making an impact yourself. That's the way to do it. And the other thing that happens when you start to do things yourself is how many happy accidents that you run into, like this macro shot of those spider's webs. Now, the lens that I had on was also a macro lens. I mean, it really is a real workhorse of a lens, actually. And I couldn't help but turn this into black and white when I saw it. I wasn't expecting to have a great shot from this trip. It was more about just testing out that camera. But I'm ever so pleased with how this came out. Well, that's it until next time. I hope you enjoyed this trip to Hailes Abbey, and if you'd like to support the channel, please do give the video a like and share it if you know anyone who might like it. Also, if you're using a camera that most people wouldn't think about, let me know what it is in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you're all using.